So you know how yesterday in the preview I said that there was going to be full slate of MLS action this week where we're going to once again have 12 games? Well, I double checked the schedule today to see how many games that is going to happen this weekend, and it turns out I lied about yesterday, and that when I said that there was going to be full slate of action, what I really mean is we're only going to get 10 games. That is going to be happening this weekend, and that I think the reason why we're getting a little bit less game than we have from previous week is because next week it's truly a MLS week. I mean, we're going to have at least one game every single day except for Wednesday next week. That is in terms of the MLS action, and maybe that is kind of the reason why we have fewer games in terms of the weekend action compared to previous week, which, don't get me wrong, as much as I love to watch MLS game, I'm kind of relieved the fact that I don't have to watch that many games and have to keep an eye on 12 or 13 games that happen in each weekend's action, and that it also kind of helps me the fact that I don't have to spend as much time doing the preview and review if there is lesser game that is going to be taking place. But that being said, there is going to be 2 games that's going to be happening on Saturday and 8 that is going to be happening on Sunday. And the first game we're going to talk about is the matinee game between Chicago Fire versus Sporting KC. And because of the fact that this is a matinee game, this means that unfortunately we have to endure on the Twitter stream again, as it is the case in this one since it kicks off at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 12:30 p.m. Pacific. But we know that game probably won't kick off until 3:55 p.m. Eastern or 12:55 p.m. my time, because usually whenever you have that kind of kickoff time, they always kick the game off 25 minutes after it was advertised as the game that is going to be kicking off. Now, the Chicago Fire, they are currently tied with Atlanta for the last spot in the playoffs. Well, SKC, believe it or not, they're only 1 point out of not the playoffs, but they're actually 1 point out of the top spot in the Western Conference. That was a bit of a mistake that I wrote here. Pretty sure SKC fans was freaking out when they saw how in the world we were actually out of the playoffs. But no, they're actually 1 point out of the top spot that is currently occupied by the 2 Cascadia team, that is the Seattle Sounders and the Portland Timbers. Now, in the last 5 head-to-head meeting, believe it or not, the last 2 meeting was all a 1-0 result, and it was in favor of Sporting KC. And it seemed like the last 5 head-to-head matchup also has been in favor of SKC, because besides the fact that they won back-to-back 1-0 victory against the Chicago Fire, they also won 4-3 against the Fire in that crazy matchup a couple of years ago before winning 3-2 against the Chicago Fire, and then it was another 1-0 game between the Fire and SKC. So judging by how the last 5 head-to-head matchup went between both of these teams, most likely this is either going to be a 1-0 result or the fact that there's going to be crazy things that's going to be happening in this one. But for me, I am going to say that, this is kind of a bit of a tough one to predict, because as much as I think SKC would be a slight favorite coming into this game, Chicago is a team that does well at home, and since they of course got more rest compared to SKC, where it seemed like SKC, they were putting all their eggs in the basket coming into this game, knowing the fact that Peter Vermees gone with a relatively weak squad against FC Dallas, and that was kind of a bit of a throwaway game for him. SKC is expected to try to win this one. But that being said, again, Chicago is a team that is very good at home. So I'm just going to go with the safe bet and say that this is going to be a draw between both of these teams, even though I know in the last 5 meetings there hasn't been a draw between both of these teams. But yeah, it's kind of hard to predict. It's going to depend on if the Chicago Fire is going to show the version that they are a decent team like they have shown so far at home, or the fact that if SKC, if their attack can actually show up in this game. And once again, Johnny Russell is going to carry this team on the offense once again. Then we'll see who exactly is potentially going to win this game. Now, moving on, in terms of the next match, is Montreal and Inter Miami. So this is the first time ever that both of these teams are meeting against each other, but there is a lot of playoff implication in terms of this first ever meeting, as Montreal currently have a 6-2-10 record, while Miami has a 5-3-10 record. This game kicks off at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific time, and it's the only night game that is going to be happening on Saturday. Montreal, of course, 1 point above the red line right now in 8th place, while Miami, they're 1 point below the red line currently in 12th place. And as I said, this is the first ever meeting between both of these teams. And, you know, for Inter Miami, last week, obviously there was a lot of frustration that they weren't able to get a win against Atlanta, especially the way that they just completely dominate Atlanta in that game, and yet somehow, in some way, they only got a point out of that game at home and missed a big opportunity to get themselves above the red line for the very first time. This is kind of a redemption match for them, and that they would really look to try to come into this game, redeem themselves by getting all 3 points in this game, and potentially get themselves above the red line for the very first time. However, that being said, Montreal is another team that are looking to try to stay above the red line, and judging how their recent form has gone, it's been kind of a miracle, the fact that the Impact are still above the red line right now. But if Thierry Henry team ain't going to continue to get going, then yeah, this could definitely be a big issue. And especially for recently, while their best player, Sofia Taidia, has been traded to another team in Saudi Arabia, or not traded to another team, but pretty much they decided to lend him to another team in Saudi Arabia. Yeah, that is going to be a huge miss in terms of the attacking end. And I just don't understand, what is it with MLS team basically decided to get rid of some of their best player to go to Saudi Arabia. I mean, besides the family reason, which obviously with NYCFC and Matrita, that is obviously understandable, but I'm not sure about why exactly Taidir decided to go to the Middle East to play, compared to just staying with this team and help his team get into the playoffs. And if you're a Montreal fan and you know why exactly that is the case, let me know in the comments below. But yeah, I'm gonna say Miami will win this one. I know I've been predicting Miami to win games a lot this season, and sometimes they have let me down, and sometimes they haven't let me down in terms of me predicting them to win the game. But I have a feeling they will really be hungry coming into this game and looking to try to redeem themselves heading into this one. Remember, this game is going to be at Red Bull Arena, and the last time that Miami was at Red Bull Arena when they played against the Redbulls, they won that game, and it was because of a wonderful free kick that Gonzalo Higuain scored, which was his debut goal for MLS. So he's going to look to try to replicate something similar in this game against the Montreal Impact at Red Bull Arena. But moving on, in terms of the next match, is Columbus and NYCFC. So remember a couple of weeks ago, Columbus was a team that was in contention of MLS Cup, and a lot of people are saying that this is really the team to beat in the East. Yeah, things have not gone well in the last 4 games, as they, of course, have gone winless in the last 4 games, and now their record is 9-4-4, while NYCFC is 8-3-7, and this game kicks off at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. Now, the good news for Columbus is that they are back home in this game. The bad news is those injury issue that they've been having, which probably tells you why they are in a bad run right now. Yeah, they're still there, and that they're probably not going to get Zaire back at least for another couple of weeks, and we don't know exactly when is Darlington Nagbe going to be back with this Columbus team. But either way, they definitely need some of their more important piece back in this team, because things are starting to unravel for Columbus in the last couple of games. And, you know, I said that when they were in a winless run, I thought this was kind of a bleak that every team kind of had to go through because of this congested season. But now they've gone winless in 4 games. And the last one, in the Hell is Real derby against FC Cincinnati, they lost that one on the road, which they only become one of only 4 teams this season to lose FC Cincinnati. Yeah, this is definitely a little concerning, and that Columbus fans are definitely panicking. The fact that the team has started to unravel, and they're unraveling probably in one of the worst time to do it right before the playoffs begin. Now, for NYCFC, they drew 1-1 to Orlando City away, and in the last 5 head-to-head meeting, it was a 1-0 win that that NYCFC got over Columbus. Before it was another 1-0 win, but this time in favor of Columbus. But NYCFC returned the favor by winning 1-0 again. So the last 3 head-to-head meeting, both of these teams ends up with a 1-0 result where both teams kind of trade 1-0 result. But before that, it was a 2-2 draw between Columbus and NYCFC. And Columbus, of course, winning 2-1 against NYCFC. And, for this game, I'm tempted to say it's a draw because, for NYCFC, I know it was a decent result that they got against Orlando, but this is definitely a bit of a long travel that they have to go through, and that I still have question in terms of going for on the attack for them, and that I'm not quite sure if Maxi Morales will be available in this game. If he is going to be available, then I think they have a good chance against a Columbus side that, they really need to get themselves back on track, because the longer they're on this winless run, the more concern you're going to have with the way that this team, even though they might finish in the top half of the Eastern Conference and get home field advantage, they could easily get knocked out because of the fact that they're ice cold. So I'm going to say Columbus will win this one, but if Maxi Morales does get back for NYCFC, then I have a feeling they have a good chance against a Columbus team that is dealing with a lot of injury right now. Speaking of New York teams, moving on in terms of the next match, the other New York team, the New York Redbulls, is going to be playing against the team that their neighbor played last week, which is Orlando City. As this game is going to kick off at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. By the way, that Columbus versus NYCFC game is the start of what would be 8 games that's happening on Sunday. And this one kicks off at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific time. The Redbulls, of course, drew 1-1 to Toronto away in the last game. And how much should I bet the fact that Caden Clark is going to score another banger? I mean, he's already done it 2 games in a row. Is he going to go for a hat trick in terms of the way that he's going to have 3 games in a row where he's going to score a banger? I mean, imagine if that does happen. MLS is just going to blow up in terms of the way that Caden Clark is going to once again score an absolute golazo and probably will once again win goal of the week. Now, for Orlando, they are coming into this game with a 12-game unbeaten run, which is not only their club record in terms of their unbeaten run, but this is now the longest unbeaten run in the league right now. Well, it's been longest for a while now. But in terms of the head-to-head matchup, Orlando, of course, were able to win 3-1 against the Redbulls just a couple of weeks before, while the Redbulls did win 1-0 against Orlando last year on the road. Before, it was a 1-0 win that Orlando put on the Redbulls and kind of returned the favor. But then the Redbulls, of course, winning 1-0 against Orlando City. Before, it was a 4-3 win that Orlando City got over the Redbulls. And, in this game, I'm going to say Orlando will win this. And despite the fact that I know in the last game the Redbulls did play they play Orlando City well, and that, if the lack of finishing in that game might have been the reason why they weren't able to walk out at least a point against Orlando City and kind of haunt them in that game. One of the big issue I do have with the Redbulls is that this season they have not been good whatsoever at home. And against an Orlando City side that, in the last couple of games, even though they are still in an unbeaten run, but they have kind of dropped a couple of points there, and that maybe is the reason why they're still sitting in 4th place and still are not making any inroad in terms of trying to get the top spot in the Eastern Conference. So, yeah, they're going to look to try to get all 3 points against a Red Bull side that, again, they are a team that tends to struggle at home this season. And after the last game against TFC, and, I know that was such a big game for them, and they were able to get a crucial point against the team that is at the top of the Eastern Conference. Will they actually have a letdown in this game playing against an Orlando side that is looking to try to do the double against them in this one? But moving on, in terms of the next match, is the desperation derby between FC Cincinnati versus DC United. And the reason why this is the desperation derby is because both of these teams are in the bottom of the Eastern Conference, with DC currently bottom of the Eastern Conference, while Cincinnati not far from behind and are currently second to bottom in the Eastern Conference. Although I will say this about this desperation derby, this is kind of a game where I feel like DC are probably maybe the more desperate side in terms of the desperation derby, because DC coming into this game, they are 7 points back off the red line, and I know there's already a lot of people saying that DC might be the first team that most likely have confirmed their status of not making the playoffs this season. You never know. I mean, even though it is a 7 point gap and we don't have a lot of games left of the season, if they can get a good run going, they can potentially get themselves in the playoff contention. But if they want to do that, they need a win in this game against FC Cincinnati, where in the last game they finally end not only the drought in terms of them not scoring a goal, but also made a historical moment by winning their first ever Hell is Real derby against Columbus, and now they are only 3 points back off the red line, and that they also are desperate to try to win this game because they want to get themselves back into playoff contention. Now, in terms of the last three head-to-head matchup, it was a 0-0 draw between both of these teams earlier when Phase 1, of course, started. This was actually the first game of Phase 1 between both of these teams. Before, it was another 0-0 draw between both of these teams, and then DC, of course, winning 4-1 against FC Cincinnati on the road. But either way, I'm going to say DC will win this because, again, in the last couple of games, I have definitely seen some promise that ever since Ben Olsen is no longer the head coach of this team, you can clearly see this team is started to play with much more energy and just look like they are looking to try their best to get themselves back into playoff contention. Whereas for FC Cincinnati, yes, they did get a big win against Columbus and get their first ever Hell is Real derby. And yes, they also broke the goal scoring drought that they had, which they kind of broke two goal scoring drought during that game. One, they broke the goal scoring drought in terms of scoring a goal in general, but two, the other goal scoring drought is that they're able to break the goal scoring drought in terms of not have to rely on penalty. Although the problem with FC Cincinnati in terms of their goal scoring drought is that there is another thing they haven't broke yet, which is they haven't scored a goal from open play and not from a set piece. And the struggle in terms of them creating and able to score goals on the set piece is maybe the reason why they have scored the least goal so far this season. And that, again, unless if they, of course, are going to try to fix that, I don't know exactly if they are able to get enough resort to make it to the playoffs. Whereas, again, for DC, they're looking to try to carry that momentum that they had against the Union, which I know they did drew in that game, and it was kind of disappointing because they looked like they were on verge of finally ending their losing run. But yeah, this is a big opportunity for them to do it against the Cincinnati side that I feel like they might have a letdown coming in to this game, and that maybe things in that game against Columbus was more because they were up for the rivalry more than the fact that things have started to turn around for FC Cincinnati and they're back into playoff contention. But moving on, in terms of the last game on this board, is the rematch of the Eastern Conference Finals. So we know that we kind of got tired of the rematch of the Western Conference Final between Seattle and LAFC since they have been playing like pretty much every single week. But I'm kind of excited the fact that we finally get to see the rematch of the other conference final, which is the Eastern Conference Final between Toronto and Atlanta. And although this game definitely isn't as glorious as the LAFC versus Seattle game is, because Toronto, clearly they are the heavy favorites in this game against Atlanta sides that is just battling for their lives to try to sneak into the playoffs. TFC have an 11-5-2 record, while Atlanta has a 5-4-9 record, and this game kicks off at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 4:30 p.m. Pacific. TFC, of course, drew 1-1 against the Redbulls, but the good news is, since pretty much every team around them either drew or lost during the weekend action, they still have a 3-point lead over the Philadelphia Union in the Supporters' Shield standing and also in the Eastern Conference in standings. While for Atlanta, they currently owns the last spot in the Eastern Conference, and actually they are tied with Chicago with the last spot in the Eastern Conference, and they're looking to try to get a win to get themselves a little bit separation from being above the red line right now. Now, in terms of the head-to-head, last year in the Eastern Conference Final, we know that Toronto was able to win 2-1 against Atlanta, but then TFC were able to win 3-2 against Atlanta before it was a 2-0 win that Atlanta got against TFC. Before, in the first ever meeting, TFC absolutely destroyed Atlanta and won 4-1 in that game. And I'm going to say TFC is going to be the favorites in this, and that they're going to win this one because, you know, after that disappointing result that they have against the Redbulls, I expect that they should be able to get themselves all 3 points against an Atlanta team that, in the last game against Miami, they were very lucky to get a point out of that one. Like, it's not every day you see a team that gets outshot 21-3 and yet you still able to get a point out of the game. And if they try to do the same thing against a TFC side that knows how to score goals and know how to break teams down, that is most likely not going to work. So I'm going to say TFC is going to be the heavy favorites in this one. Although, Atlanta, they're looking to try to maybe redeem themselves and maybe look for some revenge against TFC after they lost in the Eastern Conference last year. But that being said, I am now going to switch the boards and look at the last 4 games that is going to be happening from this weekend's action. Moving on, in terms of the next match, is Minnesota and Houston. So, as you notice, I am wearing Minnesota. And the reason why I'm wearing Minnesota is that I'm hoping by wearing this jersey during the preview can bring some superstition, the fact that the Loons can finally play for the first time in 11 days. I mean, even though it's only been 11 days, with the way that there's just been so many games that has happened in this shortened MLS season, it feels like an eternity since the Loons have last played. So, hopefully, in this game, we're actually going to be playing for the first time in 11 days, and that if that is going to be the case, then they are going to be playing against the Houston Dynamo, who currently have a record of 4-7-7, while Minnesota has a 6-5-5 record. This game kicks off at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, and Houston, well, they are struggling. They have only won 1 out of their last 9 games, and in terms of the head-to-head matchup, it was a 2-2 draw between both of these teams, and by the way, this is the 4th meeting that both of these teams have faced this season, and as I mentioned, the last one, it was a 2-2 draw, but before that, it was Houston winning 3-0 against Minnesota, and then Houston winning 2-0 against the Loons, and that this is also going to be the first time this season where the Loons are actually going to have some home field advantage in this matchup, and I'm glad that that is the case, because if this game is going to be in Houston, again, even if the Dynamo are struggling so far, that is basically, the house of horror for Minnesota, and that I wouldn't be as confident coming into this one if this was playing at BBVA Compass Stadium. But besides that, the Loons did win 1-0 against Houston at home last year before Houston winning 3-0 against Minnesota. And again, I'm going to say the Loons is going to win this because not only the fact that we have way more rest than what the Dynamo has, and the Dynamo has just not been the same team ever since Albert Feliz was sold off to Europe. The Loons, knowing the fact that they are in a situation that they got to make up games and they need to, of course, start to pick up points, and the fact that, even with this long layover that Minnesota does have suffered, it is kind of a blessing in disguise, the fact that all those injuries that we have suffered so far, well, some of those guys like Ozzy Alonso look like he most likely could be back in the starting 11. I've heard that he was back in training with the team back on Tuesday, and he was actually listed questionable in that Chicago Fire game. I think coming into this one, I don't think he's going to be listed questionable anymore, since now if he has a full week to train for this game, I'm assuming most likely he's going to be back in the starting 11. And if that is going to be the case, that's great news for Minnesota, especially we desperately need Ozzy Alonso in the midfield, knowing the fact that we're probably going to lose Jan Gregory for the remaining of the regular season because of him with the Slovakian national team. But yeah, overall, this is a must-win for Minnesota, and that since it's a home game, and home game seems to be the one that the Loons are able to get all 3 points, they need to, of course, do that against a struggling Houston side. But moving on, in terms of the next match, actually, I'm going to lower the angle of this camera a little bit because I think it's a little bit too high. But moving on, in terms of the next match, is the Portland Timbers and LAFC. So I wonder for LAFC, did they really need to think about traveling back down to LA and then come back again in Portland to play against the Portland Timbers? Because they just play at Portland and play at Providence Park last Wednesday, or not last Wednesday, but just Wednesday against Vancouver. So I kind of feel like, just in a logistic standpoint, they probably should have just stayed in Portland and just kind of stay there to get themselves prepared for this game against the Portland Timbers, who's coming into this game with a 9-3-5 record, while LAFC have a 7-3-7 record. This game kicks off at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. Both of these teams lost 2-1 on the road on Wednesday, with Portland losing 2-1 away to RSL, while LAFC lost 2-1 away to the Vancouver Whitecaps. Head-to-head matchup in the last meeting, it was LAFC with a 4-2 win against the Portland Timbers. Both teams drew 2 in the MLS's back tournament before LAFC were able to win 3-2 on the road against the Timbers. Then it was a 4-1 win that LAFC had against the Portland Timbers before it was a 0-0 draw between both of these teams in the first ever meeting. And judging by the fact that these last 4 meetings has goals, something tells me there's probably going to be some goals that is going to score in this game. However, I'm going to say Portland will win this game, and that I think the Timbers are going to be favorite because, even though the international break is now officially over, I'm not quite sure if LAFC is going to get all those players that they lost in terms of international duty to be back into this game, because there's a self-isolation period where all these players that just gone to international duty, they have to come back to at least go through maybe 5 or 6 days of that self-isolation quarantine period, and that most likely, I think some of those starters that LAFC lost to international duty might not be ready until next week. But if it is the case where they are going to be ready for this week, this should be a very interesting game, and that this could definitely one that will look like what we saw in the last couple of games, where there's definitely going to be goals that will happen in this one. But if LAFC is going to go with a team that unfortunately is going to be very depleted against a Timbers side, that they definitely felt like they lost a big opportunity to get themselves at the top of the Western Conference by losing 2-1 on the road against RSL. Well, this is another chance for them to potentially climb at the top of the Western Conference temporarily, depending on the later matchup between the Quakes and the Sounders would go, and that they have a chance to capitalize and get all 3 points against an LAFC side that, again, if this is a team that is going to be kind of the same team as the one that play against the Vancouver Whitecaps, not only the fact that they're going to be very tired coming into this one, but yeah, I expect they probably won't have enough energy to be able to beat a Timber side that is just, in terms of quality-wise, they're much better than the LAFC team that is very depleted right now. But moving on, in terms of the next match, speaking of LA teams, the other LA team, the Galaxy, is playing against the Vancouver Whitecaps. And you know how earlier I said that there was a desperation derby between DC United versus FC Cincinnati? Well, this is also a desperation derby, but it's the Western Conference version. And just like what I said about how DC might be the one that is more desperate to get a win because they're rock bottom of the Eastern Conference and looking to get a win to get themselves back into maybe be playoff contention, the same can go with the Galaxy, who's rock bottom right now in the Western Conference and have lost 6 in a row coming into this game. But if they can get win one game and get maybe a winning streak going, then they can potentially get themselves in terms of the playoff contention, although it's easier said to be done when you, of course, lost 6 in a row. And unlike how I said about DC, have been going a relatively good form and play much better than when they were under Ben Olsen. Unfortunately for the Galaxy, they still have Scaletta as their head coach, which I'm kind of surprised the fact that they're still not thinking about firing him, even though you can clearly see these clearly show that coaching is the huge issue of why this team is why this team is not doing very well, and that the coaching is really holding back in terms of what this team can really does this season. Now, the Vancouver Whitecaps, on the other hand, they currently own the last playoff spot, but are tied with RSL on points in the Western Conference playoff standings. And the Whitecaps, remember a couple of weeks ago when they lost 4 in a row and they looked like they were in the same situation that the Galaxy are in? Well, 2 wins in a row. They're come back from the dead and now are actually above the red line, albeit there are a couple of teams below them. One of them, that is the Colorado Rapids, have a lot of game in hand over them. And if they do go with that controversial points per game system to determine who's going to make the playoffs, then unfortunately Vancouver is going to be left out. Now, in the head-to-head matchup, it was the Whitecaps winning 1-0 against the Galaxy in the last one. Before, it was a 4-3 win that Vancouver had against the Galaxy. Before that, the Galaxy did win 2-0 on the road against the Whitecaps, won 3-0 against the Whitecaps at home. Before, it was a 0-0 draw between both of these teams. And that, I'm just going to say Vancouver's going to win this because, again, you know, with the way how bad the Galaxy has looked in these last couple of games, and with the confidence that Marc Dos Santos' team all of a sudden started to gain after these 2 wins in a row and have a chance to once again beat the Galaxy on the road in this one like they just did earlier this season, I think there's a good chance that the Whitecaps are going to win this one, and that, you know, as I said with the Galaxy, if they do not figure this thing out and that if they continue to go on this losing run, well, they're probably going to join DC United as a team that most likely is going to be out of the playoff picture and probably will be one of the first one that's going to be eliminated from the playoffs this season. But moving on into the last match on this board is none other than the San Jose Earthquakes versus the Seattle Sounders. So the Quakes, they're coming into this game with a 6-5-7 record, while the Sounders have a 9-3-4 record, as this game kicks off at 10:30 p.m. Eastern, 7:30 p.m. Pacific. We know what happened in the last time when both of these teams met, where it was a 7-1 blowout that the Sounders got against the Quakes. But ever since that, and ever since the Quakes were just repeatedly become a punching bag of the league, they have now won 3 out of the last 4 games and are 2 points above the red line. However, those 3 games that they, of course, won were against the 2 LA team, including beating them twice. And actually, it's not 3 out of 4. It's actually 4 out of 5 that they have won, because I just forgot that the last game, they of course, won against the Galaxy, and in a big way in the Cali Clasico. So, yeah, they have won 4 out of the last 5 coming into this game and are 2 points above the red line. But, as I said, during those 4 games, 3 of them came against the LA team, and 1 of them, of course, came against the Vancouver Whitecaps. And knowing the fact that that's kind of the resume in terms of coming into this game and actually face a real opponent, that doesn't really kind of strike a lot of fear against a very good opponent. Now, the Sounders, they're currently tied with the Portland Timbers for the top spot in the West. And as I mentioned, in terms of the head-to-head matchup, we all know what happened last time when the Sounders absolutely destroyed the Quakes by winning 7-1 in that game. It was a 0-0 draw, though, in the MLS is back tournament. Before, it was a 1-0 win that the Sounders got against the Quakes on the road. Then it was a 2-2 draw that both of these teams had before the Sounders was able to win 2-1 against the San Jose Earthquakes. And yeah, this is a good measuring stick for the Quakes. And that, I know I said the same thing in the game against the Portland Timbers, but you know, knowing the fact that that game was a road game, and knowing the fact that the Quakes have never won against the Timbers on the road, and I always say that whenever the Quakes play the Timbers on the road, it's always an automatic loss. I might take back by saying that was actually the true measuring stick, but this one is, because this game is at home against the Sounders, and I have no doubt that we're not going to see a blowout in this one, and that I'll be shocked if the Quakes are going to just once again roll over against the Seattle Sounders team, because usually you don't see this happen a lot, where a team just got roll over in the previous game, and then in a couple of weeks they basically did the same thing. And especially with the Quakes, you know, even though, yes, they have played against weak opponent and they have been capitalized on those results. At least one thing I will give them credit is that this does build confidence. That, I said before how this team, when they were losing 7-1, 6-1, and 5-0 repeatedly, they were basically building a losing culture, and that losing kind of feeling is just kind of gone through a downward spiral, and it's kind of the reason why I kind of started to quitting on them this season. But knowing the fact that at least they have started to build that winning feeling, and anytime when you started to win a couple of games in a row, you're going to build that confidence, even if you're going to be playing against a tough opponent. So yeah, hopefully that kind of winning feeling will somehow get them over the line against the Seattle Sounders, and also knowing the fact that this is at home and the Sounders are going to have to deal with the nightmare turf known as Avaya Stadium. It will be very interesting to see how it goes. I mean, so far this season for the Quakes, if you just eliminate that 6-1 loss at home that they suffer at home against the Portland Timbers, and if you even go all the way back into March when they lost 5-2 against Minnesota, the Quakes have been relatively decent at home. I mean, those two blowout losses I mentioned were the only two losses they suffered so far this season. So yeah, again, that might be also another factor why I don't think this is going to be such a one-sided affair as we saw in the last game. But I'm going to say it's going to be a draw in this game, and I'm really hoping, if the Quakes are going to prove to me that they are actually a team, that this 4 out of 5 win streak wasn't just false hope, as I've always seen with this team. They need to somehow put in not only a good performance against the Seattle Sounders, but also get a result. And I think a draw would definitely qualify as getting a result against a Sounder team. Win will definitely make me feel that maybe, just maybe, that this might have not been a little bit of a false hope that I have with the way that they have won 4 out of their last 5 games. But yeah, a draw will definitely be a satisfied result against the Quakes that are looking to try to grab the last couple of spots of the playoffs. Whereas for the Seattle Sounders, in these last couple of games, they obviously are trying to continue to get results so that they can, of course, remain at the top of the Western Conference. But if they're going to have to do that, they're probably not going to have Rui Diaz at least until maybe the playoffs, because I'm not quite sure if I mentioned this before, but Rui Diaz was part of the Peru team that made headlines of the fact that team had a COVID outbreak, and unfortunately Rui Diaz was one of those players that got tested positive on that. And I know Sounders fans were absolutely fuming on that, and they have every right to do it too, because it was kind of ridiculous, the fact that FIFA kind of forced teams to have to release these players for international duty, even though they don't. Teams been repeatedly said that they're not going to do it, but it is what it is, and they're going to have to hope to potentially for the rest of the regular season without Rui Diaz and somehow still get themselves near the top part, or at least the top 2 spot in the Western Conference. But there you have it. That is pretty much it for the preview of these 10 games. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of all these 10 games, and as always, let me know in the comments your prediction for all 10 of these games. But yeah, until then, hope you guys enjoy this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash the subscribe button, and yeah, I will see you guys next time.